there's a lot of things that go into making us whatever we become in life. I was born in 1927 on the brink of the Great Depression and the Great Dust Bowl. And my parents had come here from the Indian Territory. They were born and raised in the Indian Territory. And they had come here, and everything was wonderful. Grass was wonderful. The windmills gave them plenty of water. Everything was wonderful. And suddenly, there's no rain. So my father and some of our hired hands and some of the family drove our cattle and horses north out of Wildorada far enough that they could be on ranch land, and it took them 2 weeks to drive all of the horses and cattle across land into New Mexico on a ranch which my father had bought. The ranch had been divided into 2 parts. We got the part that had only a line camp on it. A line camp is just a little tin building, not nearly as large as this room that we're in. And all of our family lived in that line camp. Not only that, but some of our relatives and some of our friends who lived in cities or towns, because they didn't have enough food for their children, we took in several boys who also lived with us. And all of the cooking, all the activities and whatnot were actually carried on in this line camp building. And New Mexico is like here. Of course, there are no trees except mesquite trees. So we had a big wood-burning iron stove, and most of our free time activity was taking a wagon and horses and going out and collecting cow chips. So our only fuel there was cow chips. Occasionally we would use a special kind of pick and dig up the roots of the mesquite tree. The mesquite tree has a very big root system, but just scrawny little above ground tree. But as children, that kind of living did not seem abnormal to us because we had never remembered any other kind of activity. I've said to people, it's like my grandchildren who live in Washington State. They have raining season. They just expect it to rain every day. We just expected it to be dry every day, windy every day, and dust every day. There, at that particular time, the dust actually raised into the sky. And then the wind propelled that. It's true, you know, that the wind would whip it up, but it wasn't like, you know, you seen the wind blow the dirt across here. So as the dust cloud came in, it would be like this. Then as the dust cloud came in, it would become dark. So we burned kerosene. We had kerosene lamps that we also, when the Depression got so we couldn't buy kerosene, we made tallow lamps, which you would take the fat of the cow, the fat part, which is called tallow, and you would melt that, put it in a large dish, take string and make a wick out of that, and burn that for light. You could not, at times, you could not see that light across the room. You could see that it was light over there, but you couldn't see the light itself. By some, whatever the weather does, then the wind would suddenly stop blowing and the dust would, settle. But during that time that it was blowing, of course, you couldn't go outside. The wind would be so strong that if a child were caught outside, he would have to get down on the ground to crawl to where he was going to get back in to shelter. And people said, well, what would you do? We use wheat scoop shovels to shovel the sand out. We didn't move it away from the house, you just shovel it out. And of course, not like we do now. You go around, all you did was just try to get a place to cook, to serve food, and a place for the children to, sleep. So we didn't bother with, trying to clean the house because it was that way every day, almost every day. Well, as time went on there, things really started to get very, very acute. Not only did the animals not have any kind of decent fodder, but people didn't have water. We had a ranch. In ranch land, the wells are situated out by themselves. There was a well on a neighboring ranch not too far from us. And we had no water. And so my mother and my brothers, my father was away on this WPA project, they would get up at various times during the night and drive our cattle up there to water. And they had 2 or 3 different places that they would go. So this guy would know, where they were coming in. One morning about 2 o'clock in the morning, when they got to this place they decided to take them, the rancher was there with his shotgun. And he said, I wasn't there, but of course they told the story over and over. He said, hold it, boys. And so according to their story, my mother said, stand back, boys. Jim would kill a kid, but he wouldn't dare shoot a woman. She drove the cattle through. There was a lot of discussion, of course. What are we going to do? My mother said, tomorrow, the next time we take them to water, we'll go in the daytime. We'll keep cutting the fence and going through. And The next day, this guy killed himself. And my mother always regretted saying to that guy, you have degraded yourself by circumstances to the point that you would actually kill a neighbor over a tank of water. But my mother always regretted that she had said that to him. And of course, you know, all of us were in the same circumstance. And, but that always stood out in my mind that sometime, and my mother pointed out, what we're doing is wrong. You know, we have no right to go over there. All we could hope to do when times get better is to pay back what we've taken from that guy without his permission. During during really prolonged periods of time, the women would worry about especially the younger children, and they would put them in the beds and make tents out of sheets, and then they would spray the sheets and keep the sheets warm, wet to keep the dust out. Certainly, you know, during times like that, well, it was impossible to be out and do any kind of, you know, work during times like that. But people tended to be very quiet, very, you know, they just stay in one place. One of the things about the dust storms, and our parents sometimes call them the electrical storms, because there was so much static electricity that you could see it. And of course the kids devised all sorts of ways of transferring the current, you know, around and whatnot. So the children were usually active. It was really too dark to read. And of course, in those days we had no electronic devices for music or anything like that. The women, I think, were really the more resourceful in the marriage. The women seemed to have an innate understanding of how to keep animals and children alive. I think we kind of have that in our DNA of knowing how to tend animals. Most of our work on the New Mexico ranch was really tending to the cattle. And first, there was a problem with them having enough fodder, enough food. Then, having enough water. You know, there just was not that much water available. So as time would go on, one of the early morning jobs for everybody in the family would be to tail up the cattle. The cattle, many of them would get so weak that they would not want to stand up. And so a kid or two would get behind the animal and twist the animal's tail and push it. Someone would get in front of the animal and help pull it up. Once they were pulled to a standing position, they would walk, and we would drive them to water. One of the problems that we had on the particular ranch that we were on was that a weed that the ranchers had not known before, called loco, seemed to be able to reproduce itself and grow. Some of the animals, not all of them, but some of them would eat that loco, and it made them just crazy. And when you'd get them to the water, they'd fall in the tank, and then you'd have to pull them back out of the tank, and so on and so forth. Well, I don't want to spend the whole day talking about that, but what eventually happened was that nobody really back east in the Midwest cared what was happening out here until the dirt started getting that far. Now the government, they must be having a problem. So anyway, people who did not know the ranchers at all, and our mindset to animal tending and whatnot, no food was ever brought in for the animals. They decided, the government, we did not participate in this decision, that what should be done was that all of the animals should be killed. So these, I'm going to take a drink of water. Well, I was going to mention that our ranching days ended when the government came in with men with shotguns in trucks, and the ranchers would round up the cattle, and they'd shoot every cow. And they gave us $5 a head for the cattle they killed. And I think that the people who actually survived the Depression, I think we were so fortunate in that we had to figure things out as we went along. Certainly they did not have a formula of how suddenly to live under those conditions with such limited means. So I think those people who came out of the Depression that made up what we call the greatest generation came from that kind of background, because it was a survival sort of thing. And yet the people were able to keep their dignity with that. Those mothers especially, they always made whatever food we had. And I might just talk a little bit about the food, especially in New Mexico. The cattle really could not be eaten. They were so thin and whatnot. There were some wildlife there. A lot of quail. They live on the ground, and jackrabbits and cottontails. And we trapped quail and killed rabbits. We ate a lot of rabbit meat. And you do that. Of course, you had no refrigeration. Whatever you killed, you had to cook it, then, no storage of any kind of food. But the women were very resourceful in knowing how to do all of that stuff and make all of their own breads and whatnot, and actually utilize some of the wild, some of the native plants to eat. Some of them didn't taste very good, but children back then didn't fuss about what the food was like. One of the things that we still laugh about, all the children like to have a dessert. And my mother made something called vinegar pie. And what you should make up a dough, and you know, like the pie dough or the dumpling. And she'd mix water and vinegar and sugar and a little bit of flour together, and then put these dumplings in there. Oh, that was just such a wonderful dessert. Oh, they were so good. We all still talk about vinegar pies. We went to a school called Porter School, and it was a two-room schoolhouse. It had no water inside, and the little kids were in one side of the building, and the big kids were on the other side of the building. When the kids got there in the morning, they'd go out and get buckets of water for each room and a dipper. So to drink the water, teacher would, first thing she'd have us to make a little cup out of a sheet of tablet paper. And you'd go by and hold up your cup. Then you'd have to drink it real fast because those cups, once they were wet, you know, would deteriorate very fast. And then you'd carefully, you know, turn it over to let it dry to get your next cup of water. Well, the first year that I was there, I went to that school, at Christmas time, I developed diphtheria. And we already had, 4 or 5 kids who had died. So, you know, you knew what that meant. But anyway, after we came back to Texas, Highway 66 through Olam County had not been paved. That's the last section of Highway 66, and the government had run out of money, so there was no concrete from the New Mexico line to Potter County. The roads were unbelievable, and they ran parallel to that raised section that you asked if there had been a railroad there. So the road ran through there. My father was a very versatile man, and he had a pair of hand clippers. You work the handle on them and they would clip hair. And he had a barber comb and some barber scissors and a straight razor with a strap. And I'm not sure how this got started. Probably our friend Billy Bell may be the first person to get a haircut, and he spread the word. And I don't remember the schedule, but every so often, maybe every month or two, my father would cut hair. Some of the people who came, we would know. Some of them we'd never seen before. And the guys, of course, they'd sit around and roll bowl-arm cigarettes and talk and get acquainted or, tell stories while they were waiting for their turn. And of course, the kids always liked to hear their stories, so we'd, sit by. I don't think I thought about it at the time, but later on, in thinking about that, I remembered how dejected so many of those guys seemed to look when they came up on their, all of them came by horses or wagon. People didn't travel very much in cars back then. And after they got their hair cut, I don't know, they just kind of looked like they were a little taller, and he'd shave them. You'd have to cut the whiskers off first, and then he'd lather them up and shave them. And of course, to lather them up, they used homemade soap. And we made all of our own soap. And but I think that regardless of how much dirt there is, the women still, although they know it'll come back the next day, they want to get it out of the house for a while. Regardless of how difficult it is to dress the kids, they found ways to remake clothes, to pass down clothes that were clean and starched and everything ironed. You wonder about some of those guys, if that didn't even help them to extend their lives, because a lot of men back in those days were taking their lives. But when I came back, I never did go to school very much. I just went that first part, I guess it would be first grade, in New Mexico. And I never did go back to school anymore. So when we got to Texas, they said, well, how old are you? And I said, so they said, well, you should probably be in such and such a grade. So anyway, things did improve somewhat, but people like our family who had lost everything, even after it started raining, it didn't get good. And about that time that people were beginning to, we'd got together enough money to get a tractor and a combine and a one-way and a truck, to do farming. The war broke out. And I was born in 27. The war, boys from here started going to the war in 41, 42. And all of a sudden, there were no boys on the farm. And we girls who lived on farms, we did everything. We did we were just another hired hand. We did everything the boys had done. And it was kind of interesting because in our society, we'd kind of divided the work up, what women were supposed to do and what men were supposed to do. Now the women, the young girls, were supposed to be, doing the tractors and whatnot. And people always talked about, how dirty that was. The dust didn't really bother us that much on a tractor because we were kind of used to it. When I got to high school, the superintendent took us for the seniors in a truck, an open bed truck, down to a place called Buffalo Lake to spend the night. for our senior trip. And he had said to me, do you have a dress? And I said, yes. And he said, well, okay, bring a dress on the trip. I didn't know what he wanted. So when we got ready to leave that camping place, I was in my yellow dress. You can imagine what it must have looked like. And he took the other kids to a park in Canyon, and he took me over to West Texas and enrolled me in school. And he said, you had to pay a tuition. I said, well, no, I can write a check on my dad. He lets me do that. And you took somebody else's check and you marked out Borger and wrote bag and marked out the name of their bag and wrote the name of your bank in. And so I was enrolled in college, and I had no idea what that was. That year, we made no wheat. So about a little bit before Christmas, I said to this one lady, this professor who had kind of befriended me, I'm not going to be able to stay down here because we didn't make any wheat and we don't have any money, And I have contacted this professional basketball team. Back then, since they didn't have men basketball teams, women basketball teams, they had these traveling women basketball teams that would go around and entertain people playing basketball. She said, ooh, she said, I know those teams. Said, no. Said, don't do anything. I'll get in touch with you. So the next time I saw her, because it was wartime and Canyon was having trouble, of course, with teachers, I was hired as a half-time teacher at Canyon High School. And in one of my classes, I was the youngest person. I thought, because I guess all of us are more interested in the things that are currently happening than the things in the past, I'd tell you a little bit about my life's work. I have developed a program which is an anatomy of the English language for profoundly deaf children. This program has had contributions of many people over many, many years, but I seem to be the person who was able to put it all together into a composite program so that a mother of a young deaf child, if she uses this visual system of recoding English, the child by school age will have a normal command of the English language. Language must have some kind of model, and currently the educational systems that are used, the national statistics tell us that the average congenitally deaf person never achieves above a 3.4 grade level in language. With this program, We no longer have special classes for our deaf children. They're in regular classes, and the language is what we call recoded for them. English and all languages are made up of components called morphemes. A morpheme is the smallest meaningful part of the language. So in English, there are comparatively few morphemes, but because we can combine and recombine these, we have one of the richest languages. And my group, we have now recoded enough English that we can carry on any conduct of educational life skills, so on and so forth. An example of a morpheme would be the morpheme COM, com, and that is the meaning of that is with. So when you see com in a word, it conjures up to you that it's coming together with. Pan is this particular sign, pan. Pan means all. And other morphemes like all would be on that same pivot. So the morphemes are put together so that some of the meaning really is derived from the pivot that is on. And then if I use a Y with that, which is a common morpheme, so I would say, you are my company. And the child only would then have to learn COM, how to pronounce it, how to spell it one time. And he learned. We don't teach him the language. He acquires it because it's available to him through his good visual system. So in our program, where we have demonstrated the efficacy of this new system, we like to get the babies while they're still able to sit on our laps and work with us. So a teacher would be talking to the child, and actually, as far as this little baby sitting in my lap, I am just his facilitator. So in other words, as I sit here, in some way, you're not really aware that I'm here, the way I just have my hands like this. So when I want to teach him, start introducing him to the sound ah, because I'm in contact with, he's sitting on my lap and I'm in contact with his hands, I can take this hand and I can make that into that particular position, which you can see on here represents the A or the ah. So as he is shown the letter A, I would just put his hand like that. When the teacher would say ah, this is his writing hand, and I hold that in a particular way so that I can ah. So in other words, I bracket here, I trace this around, I bracket here, I bracket here, and then I say, ah. We have many profoundly deaf children who are very, very successful. Just the other morning at our Hickory Inn, some parents came out with some friends. They didn't really know where they were going, and I happened to be in there. And these parents' son has finished an electrical engineering degree at Texas Tech, has just passed his law bar and has a new law office in Edmond, Oklahoma. Profoundly deaf youngster. Their language is so good. It's just, well, it's normal.